Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, January 12, 1746 – February 17, 1827, was a Swiss pedagogue and educational reformer who exemplified Romanticism in his approach. He founded several educational institutions both in German and French-speaking regions of Switzerland and wrote many works explaining his revolutionary modern principles of education. His motto was, learning by head, hand and heart. Thanks to Pestalozzi, illiteracy in 18th-century Switzerland was overcome almost completely by 1830. Life. Early years 1746 to 1765. Pestalozzi was born on January 12, 1746, in Zurich, Switzerland. His father was a surgeon and oculist who died at age 33 when Pestalozzi, the second of three children, was 6 years old. He belonged to a family who had fled the area around Locarno due to its Protestant faith. His mother, whose maiden name was Hotzi, was a native of Wadenswil on the Lake of Zurich. The family also had a maid, Barbara Schmid, nicknamed Babeli. After the death of Pestalozzi's father, it was only through the help of Babeli that Pestalozzi's mother could financially support the family. In 1751, Pestalozzi attended the gymnasium and received instruction from educators Johann Jacob Bodmer, who taught history and politics, and Johann Jacob Breitinger, who taught Greek and Hebrew. On holidays, Pestalozzi would visit his maternal grandfather, a clergyman in Hong. Together they would travel to schools and the houses of parishioners. It was through these visits that Pestalozzi learned the poverty of country peasants. He saw the consequences of putting children to work in the factory at an early age, and he saw how little the catechism schools did for them. Their ignorance, suffering and inability to help themselves left an impression on Pestalozzi, an impression that would guide his future educational ideas. Pestalozzi was educated to become a clergyman. As a clergyman, he expected to have ample opportunity to carry out his educational ideas. However, the failure of his first sermon and influence from philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau led him to pursue a career in law and political justice. The ideal system of liberty, also to which Rousseau imparted fresh animation, increased in me the visionary desire for a more extended sphere of activity, in which I might promote the welfare and happiness of the people. Juvenile ideas as to what it was necessary and possible to do in this respect in my native town induced me to abandon the clerical profession, to which I had formerly learned, and for which I had been destined, and caused the thought to spring up within me, that it might be possible, by the study of the law, to find a career that would be likely to procure for me, sooner or later, the opportunity and means of exercising an active influence on the civil condition of my native town, and even of my native land. During the mid-18th century, the government in Switzerland condemned Rousseau's Emile and social contract, saying they were dangerous to the state and the Christian religion. A prison sentence was issued upon Rousseau. Bodmer, Pestalozzi's former professor, embraced the teachings of Rousseau and founded the Helvetic Society with about 20 other philosophers in 1765. The goal was the advancement of freedom. The 19-year-old Pestalozzi was an active member, contributing many articles to the Society's newspaper, Der Erinnerer. Pestalozzi brought to light several cases of official corruption and was believed to be an accessory to the escape of a fellow newspaper contributor. Although he was later proven innocent, he was under arrest for 3 days. These events caused Pestalozzi to have many political enemies and destroyed any hope of a legal career. After the failure of his political aspirations and at the suggestion of several friends, Pestalozzi decided to become a farmer. During this time, Johann Rudolf Schiffelli, who was also a member of the Helvetic Society, attracted widespread attention regarding his successful business model. He had converted a large plot of worthless land into several valuable farms. In 1767, Pestalozzi visited Cifelli to learn about his method. After a year with Cifelli, Pestalozzi purchased 15 acres of waste land in the neighborhood of Zurich. He obtained financial support from a Zurich banker, bought more land, and in 1769 married Anna Schulders. Pestalozzi began to build a house on the heavily mortgaged property, calling it Neuhof. The land he had bought, however, was unsuitable to farm. Unfavorable reports led the banker to withdraw his support. Pestalozzi added a wool spinning business to the farm, hoping to improve his financial situation. The challenges increased as much as his debt. 3 months after the financial support was withdrawn, Schulders gave birth to the couple's only son, Jean-Jacques Pestalozzi. He was nicknamed Shagelli and often had epileptic fits that led Pestalozzi and Schulders to constantly worry about his health. Transition from farm to industrial school at Neuhof. After the failure of his farming venture, Pestalozzi wanted to help the poor. He had been poor himself most of his life, and he had observed orphans who gained apprenticeship as farmers only to be overworked and underfed. He desired to teach them how to live self-respecting lives. This led him to the conception of converting Neuhof into an industrial school. Against the wishes of his wife's family, Pestalozzi gained the support of philosopher Isaac Eistlin of Basel, who published it in Die Ephemerides, a periodical devoted to social and economic questions. The publication led to subscriptions and loans free of interest. The new foundation had a short period of apparent prosperity, but after a year Pestalozzi's old faults again led the institution to near ruin. An appeal for public support in 1777 brought much-needed help, and Pestalozzi contributed to the periodical a series of letters on the education of the poor. The appeal, however, only postponed the failure of the institution. In 1779, Pestalozzi had to close Neuhof. With help from his friends, Pestalozzi was able to save the house at Neuhof for himself and his family to live in. Despite the property being saved, they were in financial ruin and were reduced to poverty. His family connections abandoned him, along with most people who had shown interest in his ideas. Eistlin remained a friend of Pestalozzi and encouraged him to continue writing. In 1780, Pestalozzi published anonymously in Die Ephemerides a series of aphorisms entitled The Evening Hours of a Hermit. They are his earliest works, which outline ideas that would later be known as Pestalozzian. The aphorisms attracted little attention at the time of publication. Pestalozzi knew the country peasant life much more intimately than his contemporaries did. For the visits of his childhood with his grandfather to his current state of poverty, he drew from these experiences and published 4 volumes of a story titled Leonard and Gertrude. These 4 volumes revolve around the lives of 4 characters: Gertrude, Glüfi, an unnamed parish clergyman, and Anna. Gertrude is a wife and mother from the village of Bonnel, who teaches her children how to live moral, upstanding lives through the belief and love of God. Glüfi, a school teacher, sees the success Gertrude has with her children and tries to model his school around her teachings. A parish clergyman also adopts Gertrude's teachings and the work of Gertrude. Glüfi and the clergyman are helped by Anna, a politician, who solicits aid from the state. Through these 4 institutions, harmony is achieved and a comprehensive education is offered to all people. The first volume was very successful, however, the second through a 4th volumes were not widely published or read. 5th and 6th volumes. Pestalozzi had planned a 5th and 6th volume, but the manuscript of the 5th was lost in his 1804 trip to Paris, and it is not known if a 6th was ever written. Pestalozzi wrote Christopher and Elizabeth in 1782 as a series of evening conversations to address social and political corruption. A weekly newspaper called the Schweizeblatt was also founded and disbanded during the same year, with Pestalozzi briefly acting as the chief editor. In 1794, Pestalozzi visited his sister in Leipzig, Germany. During the visit, he met Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Christoph Martin Wieland and Johann Gottfried Herder. On his return trip to Neuhof, he met Johann Gottlieb Fichte. Fichte saw in Pestalozzi's ideas a key to the solution of the educational problem, and suggested to Pestalozzi that he write about his views on human nature and the problem of its development. After 3 years, Pestalozzi wrote and published Inquiries into the Course of Nature in the Development of the Human Race. Few people read his work, and in a 1821 edition, Pestalozzi wrote, "Scarcely anyone has noticed the book, although it has been before the public for more than 20 years." This work marked the end of his 18-year literary period, during which time Pestalozzi and his family lived a life of poverty. His wife was often ill, and in 1797 his son returned home from his apprenticeship in Basel in a similar state of health. Since 1799, political changes were taking place, and when serfdom was abolished in Switzerland in 1798, Pestalozzi decided to become an educator. He wrote a plan for a school and submitted it to Philip Albert Stapfer, the new Minister of Arts and Sciences, who approved of Pestalozzi's plan. Pestalozzi was not able to implement his new school right away, because a suitable site could not be found quickly enough. In the meantime, Pestalozzi was asked to take charge of a government newspaper, the Helvetisches Volksblatt, in hopes that he could win the acceptance of the people of Switzerland. Political change of any kind during this period was viewed as tyrannical. When the French army invaded the town of Stans in 1798, many children were left without a home or family. The Swiss government established an orphanage and recruited Pestalozzi on December 5, 1798, to take charge of the newly formed institution. On December 7, Pestalozzi went to Stans, writing, "I went gladly, for I hoped to offer these innocent little ones some compensation for the loss they had sustained, and to find in the wretchedness a basis for their gratitude. In my zeal to put my hands to the task which had been the great dream of my life, I should have been ready to begin even in the highest Alps and without fire and water, so to speak, had I only been allowed." The buildings of the Ursuline convent at Stans were supposed to be converted into an orphanage, but little had been done when Pestalozzi arrived. On January 14, 1799, a number of orphans came to the newly established institution. Pestalozzi writes, "They were in a dreadful condition, both of body and of mind." He took many roles at Stans, including a master, servant, father, guardian, sick nurse and teacher. He had no school materials and his only assistant was a housekeeper. Drawing from previous experience, his aim at Stans was similar to that of Neuhof, the combination of education and industry. However, he no longer looked at the products of the children's labors as a possible source of income. Any work was considered by Pestalozzi as a way to train physical dexterity, promote efficiency and encourage mutual helpfulness. He wanted to cultivate the fundamental activities of the mind, the powers of attention, observation, and memory, which must precede the art of judgment and must be well established before the latter is exercised. It was during his time at Stans that Pestalozzi realized the significance of a universal method of education, which he would attempt to apply at future institutions. In June 1799, the French army, after being defeated by the Austrians, took back stance. They needed every available building to house the troops. The school was broken up. Even during the short time of the orphanage, Pestalozzi's success was apparent in the well-being of the children. He left Stans to recover in Gernigel, an alpine health resort, hoping to return to the orphanage when the buildings were free. He was not permitted to go back. Bergdorf 1800–1804. During his recovery in Gernigel, Stapfer assigned Pestalozzi to the town of Bergdorf. He was to receive a small quarterly salary, an apartment and a position teaching at the lowest school in town. Pestalozzi's position was not held long. The shoemaker who ran the school before Pestalozzi had arrived did not agree with his ideas. Shortly after, Pestalozzi was able to transfer to a different school. The children were 5 to 8 years old. Pestalozzi was nervous at first, but he continued his investigations and experiments in education carried out at Stans. A book was suggested to Pestalozzi by a friend, Herbert Johann Friedrich Vuvo Les Mechaniser l'Education. Although Pestalozzi said he did not know much French, what he was able to understand threw a flood of light upon my whole endeavor. It confirmed his ideas of education that he had developed at Neuhof, Stans, and now Bergdorf, in which all understanding can be achieved through a psychologically ordered sequence. In January 1800, a young teaching assistant, Hermann Kruse, offered to help Pestalozzi. Kruse already had some practical teaching experience and followed the example set by Pestalozzi. After 8 months of teaching, Pestalozzi was evaluated by school authorities who praised him for his progress. In 8 months, he had not only taught children of 5 and 6 years of age to read perfectly, but also to write, draw and understand arithmetic. The school board promoted Pestalozzi to a mastership in the second boys' school, where he continued his educational experiments. Fueled by his success, Pestalozzi decided to open another school in Bergdorf, the Educational Institute for the Children of the Middle Classes, in October 1800 in the Bergdorf Castle. Here, 2 educators joined Pestalozzi, Johann Georg Tobler and Johann Christoph Buss. During this time, Pestalozzi systemized and codified many of his methods and ideas about education. Pestalozzi, for the second time in his literary career, attracted a wide circle of readers after publishing How Gertrude Teaches Her Children. The book had a profound impact on the opinion and practice of education. It is written in the form of 14 letters from Pestalozzi to his friend Heinrich Gessner, a bookbinder in Bern. The first 3 letters describe how he, Kruse, Tobler, and Buss came to the present situation at Bergdorf. Letters 4 to 11 are his reflections and experience in pedagogical instruction and educational theory. The 12th letter is about physical education, while the last 2 letters talk about moral and religious education. Pestalozzi's purpose in these letters was to show that, by reducing knowledge to its elements and by constructing a series of psychologically ordered exercises, anybody could teach the children effectively. Because of this literary success, people from all parts of Switzerland and Germany came to see the school in Bergdorf. The school grew, but Pestalozzi still felt that he was not doing enough. The school was a financial success, however, the school could not do what Pestalozzi desired: education of the poor. He communicated to the Swiss government that he would like more opportunity to educate the poor, and in response they sent 2 commissioners to investigate his work. Having a favorable review, the government decided to transform Pestalozzi's school into a national institution. Staff received fixed salaries and money was spent on the publication of textbooks written by Pestalozzi and his staff. Using this money, in 1803 Pestalozzi published 3 elementary books. The ABC of Sense Perception, Lessons on the Observation of Number Relations, and The Mother's Book. 2 more additions were made to Pestalozzi's staff during this time. Johann Joseph Schmid (1785–1851) and Johannes Niederer (1779–1843). Schmid was at the institute as a poor pupil but was added to the staff for his teaching ability. Niederer was formerly a minister. Pestalozzi's family finally joined him in the institute to live and work there. In 1801, Pestalozzi's son, Jean-Jacques, died at the age of 31, but his daughter-in-law and her child, Gottlieb, moved from Neuhof to Bergdorf to live at the institute. Political changes by Napoleon during this time put Pestalozzi's institute in jeopardy through reform in the Swiss government. A national deputation was sent to Paris to interview Napoleon on behalf of Switzerland. Pestalozzi was elected as a member of this deputation. Before going, he published his ideas about political effort. It is a unique document in Pestalozzi's work that shows the connection of his political, social and educational influence. Pestalozzi did not enjoy his time in Paris. Napoleon had no interest in his work. On his return, Pestalozzi found the new Swiss government questioning his right to the use of the facilities at Bergdorf. They notified him that his services were no longer needed on the grounds that the buildings were needed for their own officials. To avoid being criticized by the public, authorities offered Pestalozzi the use of an old monastery in Münchenbach-See. Pestalozzi received offers of hospitality for his institute in other towns, but ultimately he decided to accept the government's offer. In June 1804, Pestalozzi's work in Bergdorf ended. Pestalozzi's stay at Münchenbach-See was short. Nearby in Hollwil, there was another educational establishment run by Philipp Emanuel von Fellenberg. Pestalozzi's colleagues convinced him to collaborate with Fellenberg to plan the new institute at Münchenbach-See. Pestalozzi and Fellenberg did not get along, and after months of planning it was decided to move the institute to Verdun. Verdun 1805–1825. By far, the institute at Verdun was the longest lasting out of any of Pestalozzi's endeavors. Pestalozzi spent the first few months of his stay at Verdun in quiet literary work, thanks to a monetary gift from the King of Denmark, Christian VII. During this time he wrote views and experiences relating to the idea of elementary education. In July 1805 the institute at Verdun opened and attracted visitors and pupils from all over Europe. Many governments sent their own educators to study with Pestalozzi with the desire to implement a similar system in their own nations. In May 1807, Die Wochenschrift für Menschenbildung, a newspaper published by the institute, was started by Niederer and regularly included philosophical discussions about education and reports to parents and the public about the institute's progress. Some notable changes to the institute at Verdun were that pupils of any age were educated, not just young children. German, French, Latin and Greek were taught along with geography, natural history, literature, arithmetic, geometry, surveying, drawing, writing and singing. At the height of the institution's fame, Pestalozzi was highly regarded for his work as an educator and in educational reform. As time went on, Pestalozzi felt that his colleagues were growing farther apart from each other, something he called the Canker of Disunion. It had not yet developed into open conflict, but different views about policy were represented by Niederer and Schmid. Niederer gained influence in the institution and started had to add subjects that teachers were not competent to teach. Schmid was open about his criticisms, and the division grew greater among the institute's staff. In 1809 and 1810 the criticism was so great that Niederer suggested to Pestalozzi that an impartial commission should be brought in from the government to determine the conduct and efficiency of the institute. Against the wishes of Schmid, Pestalozzi agreed, and in 1810 the state commissioners visited Verdun. The tone in the commissioners' report looked favorably upon Pestalozzi's ideas but not on the practices of the institute. Any hope of Verdun becoming a state institution was cut off. Pestalozzi felt that justice had not been done. Schmid resigned his post, and neither Pestalozzi nor Niederer could fill his position as teacher of mathematics. So instead they opened a printing and book-selling business. This proved to be a financial failure, and only through the help of friends was the institute able to stay on its feet until 1815, when Schmid returned. During the period of Schmid's absence, Pestalozzi wrote Swan, which is a restatement of his educational doctrines, and Life's Destiny, which is a review of his life's work. These were not published until 1826, when they were joined into one book called Pestalozzi's Swan Song. In 1814 he also wrote an article titled "To the Innocent, Serious, and Magnanimous of My Fatherland." It is a testimony to the many people living in poverty which his institutions could not reach. After the death of Pestalozzi's wife in 1815, Krause resigned from the institute. Niederer followed in 1817. Overcome by troubles, Pestalozzi sought Schmid's help. Schmid managed to raise £2,500 by publishing a compilation of Pestalozzi's works. The institute remained open for another 10 years, during which time Pestalozzi tried to convince Krause and Niederer to return. In 1825 the institute had to be closed due to a lack of funds. Pestalozzi returned to his old home at Neuhof and published Pestalozzi's Swan Song. This provoked many bitter responses by Fellenberg and Niederer in particular. Pestalozzi did not take lightly to these criticisms. He became sick on February 15, 1827, and died 2 days later in Brugg on February 17, 1827. His last words were, "I forgive my enemies. May they now find peace, to which I am going forever." Ideas. Pestalozzi was a romantic who felt that education must be broken down to its elements in order to have a complete understanding of it. He emphasized that every aspect of the child's life contributed to the formation of personality, character, and reason based on what he learned by operating schools at Neuhof, Stans, Bergdorf and Verdun. The success of the Verdun school attracted the interest of European and American educators. Pestalozzi's educational methods were child-centered and based on individual differences, sense perception, and the student's self-activity. Pestalozzi worked in Verdun to elementarize the teaching of ancient languages, principally Latin, but also Hebrew and Greek. In 1819, Stefan Ludwig Roth came to study with Pestalozzi, and his new humanism contributed to the development of the method of language teaching, including considerations such as the function of the mother tongue in the teaching of ancient languages. Pestalozzi and Niederer were important influences on the theory of physical education. They developed a regimen of physical exercise and outdoor activity linked to general, moral, and intellectual education that reflected Pestalozzi's ideal of harmony and human autonomy. Pestalozzi's philosophy of education was based on a four-sphere concept of life and the premise that human nature was essentially good. The first three exterior spheres, home and family, vocational and individual self-determination, and state and nation, recognized the family, the utility of individuality, and the applicability of the parent-child relationship to society as a whole in the development of a child's character, attitude toward learning, and sense of duty. The last, exterior sphere, in a sense posited that education, having provided a means of satisfying one's basic needs, results in inner peace and a keen belief in God.